Hello, welcome to Being Reintegrated. This is Tim Wright. So, I'm a little excited to present the brand new book from Khem Publishing. Now, I made it, but what the thing is about that book is it's so magnificent. It had to be made. So, and this isn't me trying to sell you a book. I mean, if you have the literature, you can pull it up yourself and you can follow the conversation. So, upon analysis of Semelas, who many know about, but some may not know that he was considered a reincarnated Grand Master of the Knights Templar. So that's the first shocker. Like, oh, and that's not my words. That's Milko Bogard, which I told him I was going to use his book to reference in this actual talk. And in my introduction, I talk about him. But, so he says that Hugh de Payens, here, let me get the book real quick. Here we go. It's hard to get all these books out. I'll show you up here Milko's book. So he says that Semelas is a reincarnation of Hugh de Payens, and that he was what Hugh de Payens was, or I could say it wrong. I don't know how to say French stuff. Hugh de Payens was a Grand Master of the Knights Templar. Proven. This isn't speculative. But what's interesting is a lot of this stuff that's being talked about by Semelas is unknown. And the reason why it's unknown is because I don't think anybody has really taught it. So that's what I'm here to do, is to teach you the significance of this book. So I guess we should start with the fact that the Rosarium Philosophorum in the 900s, which means the Garden of Philosophers, is a book of collections of philosophical ideas on the alchemy as it existed as a doctrine in 900. Now, I did a big research project on the Rosarium too, which I haven't published yet, and I didn't know if I would, because basically I used Joachim de Tel's study of the Rosarium, and then I built from there. So some really strong markers in the Rosarium is there's a triple fountain of like there's a Godhead that's triple in its nature, and so that is one of the markers that you have to understand is happening throughout all of the language talked about in the Rosarium, and not just the images. So the images themselves are often coitus or sexual in nature of the sun and the moon, or the masculine and the feminine, and that has gotten a little bit of a misunderstanding, although it could be looked at in the Hieros Gamos material. It's not so much that. The Hieros Gamos is basically saying that there's a form of internal alchemy that you can do, and we're not talking about retention, so you guys don't know this stuff yet. That's why I'm doing the video. There's a form of internal alchemy that you can do that will lead you to this kind of union of the two halves, so to speak. That's what the entire Rosarium is about. It talks about it over and over and over in different ways. I made a version of the Rosarium for myself. And it was really challenging because, the book hasn't been made. It was only made in ebook. It was, it's kind of hard to get a hold of. But what happened is I found all of the chapters of the Rosarium, and I was able to make a not for sale version of for myself, which is not for sale. It's a study book, and I was able to do the study on Joachim Detele's, I think is his name, Detele's study in the early 1900s on the Rosarium. So essentially, I was going to publish that, but I never really got to it. And I'm glad I did not, because there was some other work that was more pressing. So one of the markers is the three-faced deity that you'll see. Now, I'm not going to show you all the images. You're just going to have to go and get the copies, because it's too much editing to keep showing you everything. I mean, I might, but chances are I'm not going to get all the images out in this presentation. This is all building up to why Semelas is so important to the tradition. So one of the main important things is that the Rosarium is not a collapsing of duality into a unity. That is one of the misunderstandings of the entire Western esoteric tradition, is that you take duality and you move it into some kind of homogeneous whole, that then you'll experience the unification of all opposites. That's not how it's done. That is a mind which is fractured, thinking that it knows how to fix a problem with the mind. So that's the one problem that the Rosarium will offer a solution to the entire time. Now, it's hard because the mind wants to trick us into thinking that, oh yes, there's this unity. Like in one of the pictures, you'll see a scroll there, and it's almost like there's a hidden word that the mind can come up with to unify all kinds of dichotomies and all this mumbo jumbo that's been talked about in order to try to heal the mind. But what it does is it further roots the mind into the equation. And this is something that Semelas shows us through Mercury. He shows that salt and sulfur kind of contend with each other, and there's a mercurial reaction that happens. So the commentary on this book will get more and more advanced if you're able to follow it. That's not to say you're stupid. It's just to say you may not be as informed as you should be when reading a book such as The Red Lions and the White Roses. So what happens is in the Rosarium, they present this duality not being able to be transcended. There has to be a masculine, there has to be a feminine to be able to even have a progeny or kind of a mind thing that comes from both of those polarities. Now, this is something that was talked about in the Kybalion, which I'm not a adherent of the Kybalion. I don't think that's actual Hermeticism, but it is metaphysic in its nature. Now, it may not be, historically accurately all the stuff, but it does have some strong metaphysics to it. One of them is that the law of the Hermetic societies was there's always a polarity. And Semelas in this book goes through the Emerald Tablet, and he says, that which is above is like that which is below, and he gives a understanding of the Emerald Tablet in a way that's different from the way it's been presented before. So that is one of the markers, is that there's a threefold Godhead and that the unity cannot be acquired by dissolving the duality. The second one is that the Rosicrucians themselves were really kind of a forward-thinking group of mystical Christian Judeo scripture kind of tradition people. They had this kind of Essenian idea of the Johannite church, and they were not perpetuating any kind of Protestantism, and they were also not perpetuating any kind of one thing. It was a synthesis and a syncretistic movement of all these different philosophies and theosophies, basically. But the Rosicrucians did it through science. So basically the intention was to show that science was only our furthest representation of this perennial tradition, to use another philosopher's term. The perennial tradition is the one that's taught through scripture, that's taught through learning through these academic pedagogical methods. So the perennial tradition holds throughout this entire presentation. That's the other thing, is that once the initiatic understanding of the Rosarium was kind of split apart, and you got what they called puffers, the chemists who came in and thought that you were supposed to use matter to create a certain kind of matter that gave you more matter and that kind of thing. Alchemy was always a spiritual, perennial kind of doctrine, which the universal nature of it is it can fall in between different currents of phenomenological understanding, meaning the study of the subject as they experience the work of the religion or tradition. So this group of teachings have what's called the topoi, T-O-P-O-I. It's a Greek word meaning a kind of pattern to it. So the Rosicrucian teachings, their topoi is that there's a spiritual hierarchy. This is one of the main markers of esotericism, is that there is a spiritual hierarchy and there are spiritual beings. If you can root that into your thinking, then you can move to the next area, which is that there's specific practices which allow us access to these spiritual planes of existence and the spiritual beings. And that is where Semelas is kind of championing the entire movement. This is because after the 900s and the formation of the Knights Templar happened in the 1300s, and what happened is in the 1900s, we had a very, very special event happen. And this is the resurgence of the Templar Order that happened from a few scholars and researchers and students. They all got together, but one in particular was Jacques Breyer. Now, I'm not going to talk about any English translations or modern Breyer revivals. I'm talking about the actual experience that Breyer had. Now, they did some prayers, invocations, and stuff to this celestial hierarchy. If you knew this information, you could put together this next piece, which is that the treasure of the Templars was not material. The treasure of the Templars was a spiritual, perennial understanding. They were what has been mistaken as a monophysite priesthood, but they're not a monophysite priesthood. In my research, I've found that they actually have a more hidden influence than even the monophysite, diophysite split in theology. They have a hidden, suppressed theology of the third entity. And what happens is, if you know how to look at this topoi, you'll be able to see right through the arguments and right through the conversation. Well, what happens is Semelas gives us the architectural understanding of this kind of movement. And it was known to the Templars who did a resurgence in the early 1900s, and Jacques Breyer was the head of that movement. What happened is Breyer stayed in the dungeon at the Chateau d'Argeny. And at the Chateau d'Argeny, he had patrons who were wealthy royals, who are royal families or haves. I don't know the particulars on the family that gave him patronage and subsidy, but they helped him write Arcanus Solarius, which is the arcane of the sun. And what happens is through that book, you learn of the dual pillar tradition, that there has to be two pillars to move on to the spiritual understanding, which alchemy definitely is doing. And this is where it's gotten mixed up. Through well-meaning but ignorant people, they think that you're supposed to turn this dualistic conflict of antinomies into a unity of all holistic, understanding. That's not the case. After you have fallen into ego, into personality, which Semelas was primarily the order of the lily and eagle, was about personality reform. And it wasn't about psychology in the sense of a Jungian analysis or a Freudian analysis, although it brings in both of those realms, particularly Answer to Job from Jung, and Jung's pre-Answer to Job text, which was Liber Novus, the Red Book. What the Red Book was Jung's investigation into the understanding of the psyche of a human being, of humanity, and seeing that we have a split. There's essentially a fall into space and time, which he called the spirit of the times, and there's a primordial state of spiritual holism that is the spirit of the depths. But by trying to negate the spirit of the times, which is what the dualism into one monotheistic entity does, it lies to the personality, which the personality doesn't buy into it. So we get this symptomatology of being kind of broken. Not that we were broken, because there actually is nothing to break. It's to unbreak the brokenness, and you're fine altogether. So this is what we're doing in the Rosicrucian work, is we're trying not to break the mind anymore, and not to break the psyche, not to break the relational space, and not to break the individual. Through their very short period not there, I'm one of them, you see, flesh and bone, through our very short period here on this incarnational time frame in the spirit of the time. So the Time Lord has us, and there is no escaping that time-space dichotomy. This is a lot of what the Kala Chakra, highest yoga tantra in Buddhism is about, is reconciling this mind, which has no holds barred, basically, not to mention any wrestling stuff, but it's just not, it has no restriction, no restraint. It'll do whatever it thinks it can do to resolve its fundamental agony or irritation, anxiety, fear. And that propulsion into a solution is to try to resolve all the things that are causing conflict. And that's not the solution. This is the beauty of the Templar doctrine, and particularly of Jacques Breyer's resurgent Templar doctrine, which eventually I'll be translating his works on alchemy. But I mean, I'm one person, I can't make 100,000 pages as much as I'd like to. Come over to Khem Publishing, and maybe I can get you some subsidy while you're doing some of this work if you're interested. But to move along, Jacques Breyer kind of explained what the hidden Templar doctrine was, and that's why it was so powerful for the group of hostile takeover people that used Breyer's doctrine in a bad way. But essentially what Breyer's doctrine says is there's a polarity in this life that cannot be transcended by thought. It cannot be transcended by, homeostasis energy. It's not going to happen. You have to acknowledge the two pillars. You have to acknowledge that there's a dichotomy in your consciousness. And so this was exactly what Jung's presentation was of the Red Book, which he never wanted to publish, and which he was telling people through very hidden, very prepared channels that, look, you can't resolve the dichotomy by trying to pretend the dichotomy doesn't exist. It's not going to happen. You cannot do it. It's not. No one has done it. No spiritual literature is really about that. Now, we might take that thesis and push it into that particular solution with the spiritual literature that we're reading, but it doesn't say that. Not at all. It doesn't say you get back to this pre-fallen state where you're not fallen anymore, and then the fall completely goes away and you have complete understanding of all Eden. It does not say that. The reason why is because it's super metaphysical. We'll go through a logical kind of jungle gym a little bit. If you were to use the fall to refute the fall cannot be refuted while it is acknowledged in its refutation. You can't do it. It's not going to happen. And this is the beauty of the book of Genesis. I reread it after all this education, and I finally saw that this whole story of the serpent and the fall of good and evil and the tree of life and all of this knowledge and doctrine, it's actually misunderstood by almost everyone who talks about it. That the tree of life was barred not because we're bad people, but because there needed to be a way to save us from the dualistic fall which the knowledge of good and evil caused. And it doesn't mean you could just restore to life by releasing your attachment to the tree of good and evil. It's not going to happen. You're just not going to do it. And so I spent so long under that delusion, trying to philosophize, trying to analyze, trying to find a right way through even meditation. And that's not what it's about. Meditation introduces the other thing. Rather than thinking about the dichotomy, you have a not thinking about the dichotomy in the midst of the dichotomy, which is the old Hermetic many within one. Now that is the kind of reduction that you can do, but there is no way to go and attack the antimonies with a personality mind that's based ontologically on an antimony. So the foundation, just like you cannot use the fall to refute the fall in a solution that the fall is no longer existent, you cannot use a self that is split ontologically in order to resolve the ontological split of the self. It doesn't happen. You can't play with philosophical forms like that. It just won't work. This is why you were frightened in the Eleusinian mysteries. This is why mostly all of the work that's done in esoteric psychology is to get you to harmonize your conflictual energy. Well, Semelas goes even further than that. Semelas understands some secrets about the etherization of the blood. And this is some of the main material of the Templars, that they realized that the Baphomet entity, sorry, it's hard to say all this stuff, and it's really challenging to put it out so succinctly. So if I messed up, I apologize. The presentation is pretty difficult to do. The Baphomet personality, assumption of the Baphomet, causes a split in the ontology of the individual. When you do that, you become chained to the duality. You don't become free from it. So this independent, self-sovereign attitude of I'm going to conquer all with will and my own individuality because I'm sovereign, it doesn't work. You can't do that. No individual has ever done that. Even Jung himself ended up screaming on his deathbed, according to Louise von Fonts. And, it's It's what happens. You cannot play with these things and pretend like your wishful thinking, your desire to not be in conflict and pain, to understand the suffering nature of things is going to bring you some kind of happiness. And this is exactly what Jung says in the answer to Job. He says, our attachment and addiction to the ultimate good causes a separation from the ultimate good. Because to have the ultimate good, you have to postulate the ultimate bad in order to really see the fray between those two. Because the ultimate good is not an absence of the ultimate bad, and the ultimate bad is not an absence of the ultimate good. This is how we split the two in half, and we say that they'll never meet. And so this is the beauty of Semelas, is that he understands this entire landscape. Now, I brought up the Rosarium Philosophorum, and the reason why is because in my studies of the Rosarium, I found that this was actually a thing that was used to unconsciously produce what's called psychological transference and countertransference. Basically, the analyst is trying to intimate with your subtle body and unconscious body, and Jung used sexual metaphor. I want to give a nice statement and say sexual metaphor, and then further analysts would look at it in a different way. But the point is you're trying to get your unconscious and their unconscious to have a unified state of understanding. So you could speak to the person in a way that goes beneath the defenses. And they use the Rosarium to do this kind of countertransference and transference. This is so important to the therapeutic relationship. You have to have transference. You cannot have a person that thinks they are different than another person, helping a person who's different from the other person. There has to be an entity that comes together within those two individuals and becomes a, kernel of truth, so to speak. Well, that is the same with Semelas' method. It's psychology without any of the psychobabble. It's saying when you come up with when you come up with a conflict, that conflict is your conflict. It's a gift for you to be able to work through what you got going on with a dichotomy that's present in your consciousness. It's really difficult, and it can't be shaken. So we're in a place right now of 2025 where this is at a crescendo. Individuals are conflict-ridden, and we're in a world where, we're just constantly at odds with each other. Steiner talked about the war of all against all, and that's kind of where we're at now. I mean, I hate to be so pessimistic, but it's a wartime inside of ourselves. We're not in a peaceful place. Those peaceful places are not here. So, I think Semelas is a very good introduction to this kind of perennial philosophy for the age that we're in, for the esotericists that are there to be able to be the mind-mapping, society-changing, reforming entities. This will help you. Now, I charged $50 for it because I did a loss on all of the books that I've been publishing. I went lower than any publisher out there for paperbacks. So I did charge a little bit more for this one. And it's hardcover and it's a limited edition. But this video should give you the overall perspective just to get into the kind of geodome that the Red Lions and the White Roses is talking about. I hope this video was helpful. I hope that it helps you put together some of the pieces of the book that normally would not be available to any researcher, because you have to cross the streams like Ghostbusters to get the huge explosion of syncretistic perennial philosophy that comes from doing just this work. Thanks so much in your participation and watching this video.